I'm tired all the time now, Martin Yanko said in an interview. I want to go back to Europe because it's such a difficult life in Canada. Things have got so bad in Canada that Ukrainian refugees are actually leaving the country, and they're citing the high cost of living. And no, that's not a joke. That's actually what's happening. So let's get into it. Such a difficult life in Canada. Ukrainian immigrants leaving because it's so expensive. High housing costs and underemployment among challenges. This is literally the number one reason why most immigrants leave. It's not just Ukrainian refugees. It's most of the immigrants coming to Canada right now. Underemployment, high housing costs, those are the things that these people are citing. And they're not really wrong when you actually think about it and when you look at it. Because if you look at what's happened with inflation for rents, they have absolutely skyrocketed. Canadian renters are seeing costs rise at the fastest pace in 40 years. And you can see that this chart goes all the way back to the 1980s. And you can see that we're getting up to these 1980s levels. And you have to remember, back then, a lot of women were entering the workforce and there was a significant increase in the household income. Now, it's debatable whether they were entering the workforce because they wanted to, or it was just because of financial pressures because of inflation. But the reality is, there is no more leeway left in the household. We can't create extra people. So the reality is, people are just really having their back up against the wall right now when it comes to these rent increases. And this will end really badly. I want to emphasize this. It sounds like it's all great for landlords, but the problem with the situation that's going on right now in the housing crisis, especially the rental crisis, is there's just a complete lack of supply and an absolutely massive amount of demand. And it hasn't made sense to buy a rental property in Canada for a long time, as I've pointed out many times on this channel. But the reality is the costs have got so wide right now that it makes no sense, even if you think the home is going to appreciate. So the reality is there's just not been enough new rentals that have been created, and the government has gone off on this massive immigration campaign. And I know a lot of people believe that those people are just going into the housing market and that's what's inflating the housing market. And that's not the case, but that is the case when it comes to the rental market and what's going on there, especially right now when you think of what's going on in the housing market. It lends itself right into what is happening in the rental market here. So this is not a good thing, especially when you think we're in a technical recession right now, so things aren't going to get much better. So you have to think all these landlords right now that are renting their places, they're really in a precarious place because, you know, their renters can't afford these high costs of rent. So it's an absolute nightmare for them if you think about it. And the risk of them going into problems, financial difficulties is very, very high. A lot of the people who were in foreclosure in 2008 were people who bought investment properties, they were renting them out, and then guess what? Their tenant couldn't afford the rent. They couldn't find anybody to fill it who had decent credit, even though there was demand out there, or could afford that house. So you're going to see a similar thing happen in Canada, and really it's going to be the people who are renting like the bigger, more expensive types of rental units that are going to be affected by this the most, in my opinion. But let's see what they're talking about here. So not long after Russia began bombing Ukraine, Oleksiy Martinyenko packed his bags and fled to Kremenchuk, a once tranquil but now war-torn city roughly 190 miles from Kiev. He moved to Stockholm and took a job as a line cook. 1 year later, as his work visa approached expiry, he relocated to Canada's largest city. The strenuous work and high cost of living has taken its toll. Martinyenko, 44, is now planning to return to Sweden. His monthly expenses in Toronto include roughly $100 for a phone plan, $150 for public transit, $400 for groceries, and $1,000 for a room in a rooming house where the kitchen and bathroom are shared among 4 tenants. Any money left over is sent back to families still in Ukraine. At least in Stockholm, he earned enough to have savings, he said. And they are living in poor standards if you think about it, and I would say almost third world country country standards because Canada is becoming a third world country. It's just happening slowly, so people don't really notice, but crime is going up. You're seeing the standard of living that's absolutely collapsing, and you're seeing new people who are coming into the country who are already in that depression, whether they're refugees or legit immigrants coming through skilled pathways, which account for like 5% of all immigrants in Canada. But the reality is, when you look at what he's paying here, I mean, his grocery bill is pretty low. He's not exactly spending loads of money, is he? $400 for groceries, I would say that's pretty good. He's using public transit as well, so that's subsidized. And then he's paying $1,000 for a room, but it's the rent costs which he's really getting screwed over by. I'm tired all the time now, Martin Yanko said in an interview. I want to go back to Europe because it's such a difficult life in Canada. Canada has long been a choice destination for newcomers seeking a better life in a prosperous nation. Prosperous nation? Where did they get this stuff from? It makes me wonder. You know, this hasn't really been a prosperous nation since 2008. There has been major problems in Canada. The growth that we've seen over the past decade has been entirely based on the housing bubble and all the related industries related to housing, and also the immigration bubble that has been built on top of that as well, because immigration helps drive growth when you actually have the jobs there available for people to take and be productive in the economy. But we've actually got productivity that's actually declining right now, and most of the people who come to the country are actually becoming unemployed. So it's kind of insane what's going on. And you've also had this Canada Fall economic statement that's come out, and it's just been a disaster. Essentially, the government is just planning to spend more and more money, and we'll get into the interest charges and everything like that. Ottawa will spend $28.9 billion on the Canadian Armed Forces this fiscal year, about $18 billion less than what the government will send to payments to the banks and bondholders carrying Canada's debt. So doesn't that kind of tell you how bad things are, especially in the times we're in right now, which are very volatile, especially considering we have a government that virtue signals and just feels like it has to get involved when anything happens in these foreign countries, armed conflicts, even though they haven't got a military that would stand a chance against these different countries. That is insane. So they are spending more on servicing the debt than they're going to spend on the armed forces in this time. And then this basically shows you the debt charges in billions of dollars and how it's rising right now. And it says also the federal debt has doubled from about $619 billion in 2015-2016, the first year of Trudeau's government, to about $1.2 trillion last year. It's expected to climb to $1.4 trillion by 2028-2029. And all that money, all that debt, you have to remember, guys, all that debt is new money. That's new currency that is going into the system. And it very much depends on how the government spends that to whether it's going to cause a rise of inflation really, really quickly, like it did in 2021 after they essentially were giving everybody stimulus throughout 2020 and 2021, whether it's you don't have to pay your mortgage or subsidizing your wages so you can stay at home. They were doing all these different programs which cost a significant amount of money. And you know, the funny thing is, guys, it doesn't matter who was in charge. If the Conservatives were in charge, they would have done the same thing. I mean, just look at what happened in the United States if you think that wouldn't have happened, because they did the CARES Act. It was Trump that was telling the Fed to drop rates really low, and they didn't hold back when it came to stimulus. They went full ahead and did it. So the reality is, it's because people don't understand the consequences of this. It's what most people want, and that's why the government does it. And the problem is, in society, we've got to this point where we always look at the government now to fix our problems. And the government is the worst person that can fix the problems for us. Why? Because they will spend money doing so, and all that money will just be inflationary. And inflation is essentially a tax. I mean, all you've got to think about is the government does not produce anything. It doesn't produce anything. So when they spend money at a deficit, that is new money that is introduced into the system. They haven't introduced any goods or services. So essentially that is directly inflationary. And I hope that makes sense. So it's kind of insane what's going on with the debt. But you know what, guys? I will point out, though, that if you look at mortgage debt, it's actually higher than government debt. So mortgage debt is around 2.1 trillion right now. It's actually surpassed GDP. So the entire GDP of Canada, guys. So literally right now, the debt has surpassed GDP. So now there is more mortgage debt, just mortgage debt, than we actually produce in terms of the whole country's GDP. And then you can tack on government debt, you can tack on private business debt, and all these other forms of debt. So all these forms of debt are directly inflationary. A mortgage debt, for instance, is inflationary for what? It's inflationary for real estate prices and housing. So the thing is, when you have mortgage debt that grows rapidly, obviously that's new money that's created, drives the price up of the housing, because essentially no good or service is created by the bank. They're not building homes when they create these loans. They're essentially just issuing new currency into the system. Now you hope the supply comes online in response to that. And really we have seen that. I mean, we saw housing starts at all-time highs throughout the pandemic. But the thing is, most of what's driven us here is rampant speculation, at least in the housing market. So it's very interesting. And then you've got the government that's just adding to that. So you've got so many forces that are just causing this depression in Canada, in my opinion. So the government has less fiscal leeway now to address issues like the housing supply crunch because it's spending so much more on servicing debt. And this is the problem. Again, guys, I see it all the time, is we have to talk about the government fixing the problems. Why does the government have to fix all the problems? Why are we looking at the government? If they're going to fix the housing supply problem, you know they're going to spend a load of money and they're going to waste a load of money. And the problem is we look at the government to fix everything now as society. And this is a major issue, in my opinion, because the free market will solve problems. If there's a return there, then people will build more homes. If they can earn a return, no matter what the interest rates are, if that return is high enough, they're going to build the homes. The reality is, when you think of the housing bubble in Canada, it's actually a land bubble. And that's what makes it even more ridiculous. Because land, we have like an unlimited amount of land in Canada. We're the second largest country in the world. So it's kind of insane, but here we are. So anyway, let's continue on here. While the government says it expects Canada will avoid recession, the Department of Finance is projecting the economy will see almost no growth at 0.4% next year. And we're already in a recession. So they're talking about avoiding a recession, and we're already in a recession. So isn't that absolutely insane, guys? I mean, this was obviously before we got those GDP numbers last week, but it just shows how crazy the government really is. So anyway, I guess we'll see what happens with this. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. You might also like this playlist here. If you're looking for a VPN, go to expressvpn.com/market mania. Let me know what you think of this new streaming software, whether it's better than the old one. Leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.